Coming up on this episode, I'm joined by my Blue Man Hoop colleague, Evan Quarnstrom. We discuss Chris Paul's fit at the Warriors, whether there's any flaws in Golden State's current roster, and who they should use the 14th roster spot on. Plus, a look at Jonathan Kuminga, his rise, where he can get to this season and overall in his career. Plus, we look at the main rivals for the Warriors in the West and across the NBA. Before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed to the Golden State with Mates YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252 on Twitter. But enjoy the episode. Welcome to the show, Evan. How's your day going today, mate?
Thanks for having me. It's going well. Beautiful sunny day here in Santa Cruz, just south of San Francisco.
Wonderful. Now, you were telling me beforehand, obviously in Santa Cruz, but you've been away for 2 years. You've only recently returned. Let us know, where have you been in the last couple of years? Where's your journey kind of taken you?
Yeah, good question. I did a bit of a radical life change. I left my marketing job 2 years ago, started traveling, doing freelance writing, mostly in the outdoors, travel, and surf world. So I was in South America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and I just got back last month.
Very good. Yeah, sounds exciting, I'm sure, no doubt. All right, let's talk about some Warriors. Let's get into it. Season's coming up here. Now, every guest that I've kind of had on this podcast over the offseason, the first thing you kind of got to go to is back to the start of the offseason in June, the Jordan Poole, Chris Paul trade. So just your thoughts initially on the move on those two players individually and how it's kind of shifted for you since seeing Chris Paul in a Warrior uniform for the first time on Saturday.
Man, when I saw that ESPN notification, I just started laughing to myself. Chris Paul on the Warriors, I couldn't believe it. But my first reaction was, honestly, I've always been pretty optimistic about it, especially compared to other people. I love Jordan Poole, but he was so inefficient, so turnover prone. He wasn't the player that we saw in the playoffs the year before. And I wish him the best, but he was hurting our team so bad. Even just getting rid of him and replacing him with an average player, I think would have been an upgrade. So the fact we were able to get Chris Paul, you can argue if you think that was a good return. I think it was. The rest of the league saw how inefficient he was, so we got Chris Paul, and I was like, that could work. Having another ball handler, which we haven't really had a great ball handler since Livingston, and someone who can distribute. So I think I'm relatively optimistic.
Yeah. It's funny you kind of say that because I was actually speaking to a mate about it yesterday, and he said, maybe just, getting rid of Poole was, addition by subtraction, just having him off the team. Now, that seems really harsh, and I think that's probably maybe slightly unfair, but you're right in saying that there were plenty of times last season where, having Jordan Poole on the team was a major detriment, particularly come playoff time where his shooting and his turnovers, he was, nearly unplayable really by the end of that series. And you're right, to have a backup point guard now in Chris Paul, whether he starts or whether he comes off the bench, he'll be running the second unit regardless, and that's going to be truly effective. I did listen to Hoops Tonight a couple of days ago. Jason Timpf runs that, and he was talking about CP3's first game with the Warriors, and he basically said, look, there's too much IQ and skill among this team. And particularly, the veteran core of, Steph, Clay, Draymond, Chris. There's too much skill and IQ for this not to work offensively. It is, and I think we saw that in, yes, albeit it was only 12, 13 minutes against the Lakers on Saturday. But I think we saw pretty much straight away that this will work offensively. It's just going to be the size issues and the defensive issues on that end of the floor, and whether, particularly Clay can hold up defending threes and fours, which I think he made a pretty good start, and pretty optimistic after his performance on Saturday against the Lakers. Again, only 12, 13 minutes, only guarding, LeBron wasn't playing, so guarding the likes of Rui Hachimura, he'll certainly come up against better opposition throughout the season, no doubt. But I think it was a pretty optimistic start. Looking at the roster, are there any genuine flaws for you? I know, the particular lack of size has been, a lot of speculation regarding that, and Dwight Howard and other potential bigs. Who would you like Mike Dunleavy Jr. to use the 14th roster spot on here?
Yeah, and going back to what you said, like I totally agree. Getting rid of Poole as he was last year was addition by subtraction. Like, yeah, he averaged 20 points a game. He was a threat, to drive, like put pressure on the rim, which we didn't really have. But that's not taking into account like the impact he had on the game. You look at the statistics, like he was like it was horrendous. He was I hate to say it, man, but he was really not helping us win. Okay, so back to your other question. Any flaws in the lineup? 14th roster spot. Like you said, like playing with Curry and Paul guarding in the backcourt is we have to kind of see how that happens against a good backcourt that can really take advantage of that. I think they can get away with that against a lot of teams. Like it won't be a big issue, and perhaps whatever defensive issues it creates will be made up for in the offensive end. We'll have to see. Everyone wants to get another big man for for Looney and Draymond, right? As a roster flaw. I mean, I think it's nice. I also don't know like how much minutes that person would realistically get. It's more like if Looney or Draymond go down to injury, which they probably will at some point in the season for some amount of time, like it's good to have that insurance. Otherwise, like you're playing games without any center depth that can, lead to like an automatic loss. So probably those two things, center depth and defense in the backcourt.
I did see there was a article, I think overnight for me, I literally just woke up to it, from Anscape's Mark J. Spears about Rudy Gay. There's just a lot of media attention around Rudy Gay to the point where it would be shocking, like, not to have him as the guy on the 14th roster spot. Veteran, 37 years old, obviously coming into his 18th year in the league. Just like what I saw at Media Day, like this huge, piece from Mark Spears, interviewing Rudy Gay. For him not to get the roster spot now would be kind of strange. Like, do you have any personal opinions on Rudy Gay and what he could add to the team?
I tend to agree with you on that. Like whoever gets the 14 roster spot is probably not going to see playoff minutes. It's like they're not going to crack the top 8 or 9 in the rotation. You don't need to go on this wild goose chase for someone. If he can provide veteran presence and I don't know how good he is anymore. I have to see how good he is at this point in his career. If he can provide okay defense on the wing and okay wing pressure on offense, why not? It's better that than taking a risk on some random player in the G League. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Having the veteran presence and experience in the locker room, I think, is valuable. And yeah, there's no player that exists right now that you are going to bring in that you are going to realistically look at as this is a guy for our playoff rotation. There is literally not a guy that exists. Now you could develop someone. You could have someone come in, as you said, maybe a young player comes in, and develops to the point where all of a sudden, like a Gary Payton II did a couple of years ago, where he got the final roster spot, and then all of a sudden, throughout the season, you realize, hey, this guy is actually a really valuable contributor, particularly, with what he does defensively, and all of a sudden he does become part of your playoff rotation. But at this point, there's just not that player. So we'll wait and see what happens. But as I said, I would be surprised if it's not Rudy Gay. And in that article from Mark Spears, he basically stated the Warriors want a veteran. Well, that automatically takes out some of the other options, guys that haven't played really in the league. Donovan Williams, Javen Johnson. It really narrows it down to Rudy Gay and Rodney Magruder, maybe. And it's like, I think Rudy Gay is well ahead of Magruder, and especially given Magruder's, I'm not sure what his status is for Friday's game against the Lakers, but he obviously missed the first one in concussion protocol, so we'll see how that plays out. One of the Sorry, did you want to add something on that?
I was just gonna say you're right. Like what happened with GP2 was like a 1 in a million thing. And the
Mm.
fact that he was able to be like as impactful as he was, like he was huge in the playoffs. We're not gonna find that again. But like even someone like GP2 on this roster might be more of like a matchup type player. Like he
Mm.
might not be an every night rotation when it gets cut down to 8 or 9 guys. Now that we have Chris Paul in the backcourt, so we'll
Yeah.
see.
And I agree, because I wrote an article a couple of days ago on, 3 players that may be impacted or may feel the pressure of the expected growth of Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, which we'll get into in a second. But Gary Payton II was probably the player that I think will be most impacted by those 2 guys, because if they take a genuine leap here, then they all of a sudden quite clearly, I think, go past GP2 in the rotation. He's a different player to Surridge. The Warriors will be leaning on Surridge a whole lot as that kind of backup big. So all of a sudden, you got your top 6, you got Kuminga, you got Moody, you got Surridge. All of a sudden, Gary Payton II is at least the 10th man in the rotation. And as you said, come playoff time, if you cut your rotation down to 8 or 9, I think he's going to be a situational player against some teams where you've got an elite perimeter player where they're getting hot or whatever, and you need to put him in to try and cool them off, rather than a guy that we're just penciling in to play 15 minutes a game. I just don't see that.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like, I think it'll be incredibly valuable to have him available now for the whole season, having not been on the team for the start of last season, then obviously having his injury issues when he came over after that trade from Portland. One of the big things from Saturday's game against the Lakers was the bench, right? Steve Kerr split his minutes up, had his starters play 12, 13 minutes, and then used his second unit, which was Brandon Pajemski, Peyton, Moody, Kuminga, and Saric for quite a bit as well, before kind of the other reserves came in the second half. The bench looked really good. Again, the Lakers were missing a couple of players, but the bench did look fantastic. Warriors ranked 17th in bench net rating last season, which was actually kind of a bit of a scramble to get to that point. Earlier in the season, they were in the bottom 5. Where do you think they can get to this season in terms of a bench net rating and across the league, and how important is it, I suppose, for them?
Man, do you remember at the beginning of last year, we were everyone was like, "Oh, the bench is deep this year." Like, then it turned out like Kuminga and Moody weren't ready. Wiseman was like Poole, like just hurting us every second he was on the floor. No offense to Wiseman, I wish him the best. And it turned out we actually had like the worst bench in the league. We thought we were deep, and it's like actually our bench is horrible. Um, it's kind of been an ongoing theme throughout the Warriors, like every now and again over the years. Not back in the day we had Livingston, Iggy, that was good, but the Warriors Twitter calls it like the Goon Squad. Basically, when Steph comes out and we put on the bench and like, just please stop the bleeding. It's just so this year I'm actually cautiously optimistic. Kuminga and Moody actually look ready to like be contributing bench players, which last year they kind of did, but then they weren't. Um, Saric is like a solid backup big, I think. We have Chris Paul. You can put him on the bench or not. We have Gary Payton. Like, I think the bench will be much more versatile and formidable this year than it had been. We'll see. We were saying this last year, and it
Yeah.
turned into a nightmare.
I think I am getting probably a little bit overexcited from what I've seen on one preseason game, and I want to try to not overreact to one game, but it is incredibly hard to when you've like spent a whole off season analyzing the team, analyzing the moves they've made, what could potentially happen, and then sorry, you get one game of data, and that's all you can go off really, and so you got to take that basically. But I will go back to the opening preseason game last season, which was in Japan when we had those couple of games against the Washington Wizards. I think James Wiseman scored 20 points in the opening preseason game, and I just remember then thinking, oh, okay, like, here we go. Like, again, bench is going to be good this season. We got Wiseman, we got Moody and Kuminga coming up, and then, as you said, the season starts, and that the bench was basically the primary reason in going 3-7 to start the season, and the starting lineup: Steph, Clay, Wiggs, Dre, Loon, the best starting lineup in basketball, and yet we only got to a 44-38 record. Now, yes, Steph and Wiggs missed plenty of games last season, but again, it goes down to the bench unit and the struggles that they had to begin last season. Talking about Jonathan Kuminga, and we can speak a little bit about Moses Moody as well, but obviously those two guys, are kind of the X factors in the Warriors season going forward here. I've kind of been playing around in my head, like, what level can JK actually get to this season, and what level can he get to, overall as a player? Because he's obviously supremely talented, but where do we actually view him? And obviously we think he's going to take a jump here, but where does that actually lead to?
Yeah, as far as this year, what's the ceiling we can expect from this year? Like, I mean, he's shown potential to someday be an all-star. The way the roster is constructed, it's going to keep him from ever becoming an all-star in the short term. Like, he's just not going to get the opportunity unless he plays himself into that. Like, that's what Draymond did when David Lee went down in 2014. He played himself until he was invaluable and played himself into becoming an all-star. Could that happen with Kuminga? Maybe. That might be overly optimistic, but I think the defense he showed towards the second half of last year made me really optimistic. I don't blame Kerr for taking him out of the rotation in the playoffs. I kind of can see how he was the odd man out in the crunch. But what I saw last year leads me to believe his defense will be good. He looked good in the preseason. I mean, when you give him the ball in the preseason, he's scoring. Who knows if that will last in the regular season? But yeah, we can expect him to be like a 15 points per game scorer off the bench. That would be amazing. So we'll see.
I think someone I read a tweet earlier, and I can't remember who it was, but I think it was someone somewhat credible who was actually kind of pushing a Jonathan Kuminga sixth man case this season. I don't think that'll be the case, purely because he's not actually necessarily going to be the sixth man, given you're going to have one of Chris Paul or Kevon Looney. I mean, if they do start Paul and Looney comes off the bench, could Kuminga actually average more minutes than Loon? Maybe. I think Kuminga might actually average more minutes than Loon just generally, even if Loon
I would
starts.
hope he does. Yeah.
Yeah, Loon will probably play 20, half a game, maybe 24 minutes. I think Kuminga can get to 25 plus minutes. He averaged 21 last season. I think that would be a realistic goal, because if Steve's putting the trust in him to play 25 plus minutes, and obviously he's producing a consistent enough basis to be able to do that. Obviously, first of all, we just need a nightly rotation role, right? Even listening to some of the Warriors Plus Minus podcast from a few weeks ago, and they were even talking about is Kuminga the seventh man in the rotation, or is he the 10th man in the rotation? Because if he has a poor start to the season, then all of a sudden Steve looks at Moody, Payton, Saric as more trustworthy options, and then all of a sudden Jonathan Kuminga is back to the 10th man in the rotation, and he's having nights where he's playing 8 minutes, and then other nights where he might be playing 16, 17. So it is important that he has a really strong start to the season. Obviously, the first preseason game is a good starting point to that. But, it goes from nightly rotation role. The big thing for me, I think, is by, midway through the season, latter end of the season, is he a potential closer? And in that article I spoke about in regard to, players that could be impacted, Andrew Wiggins was one for mine. Now, at the moment, I think, Jonathan Kuminga is more of a 4 than a 3. But in saying that, I think Wiggins will play a whole lot at the 4, with Dre at the 5 this season. So they're kind of positionally similar. And also with the way that JK has shot the ball late last season and, shot 4 of 8 in the preseason game against the Lakers, the shooting is coming along to the point where maybe you could play him at the 3 a little bit. We'll wait and see what happens. But is there a point where there's a game in the middle of the season and Andrew Wiggins is readily available, played 25 minutes, ready to come back in, and Steve actually says no, JK's got it tonight, and Jonathan Kuminga closes lineups over Andrew Wiggins, or is whether it's Wiggins or someone else, like that's what I'm looking at. Is he a potential closer on this team? Not every night, but on nights when he certainly has it. We saw that a bit, like he was closing games last season, but that was primarily when Wiggins was out of the lineup. And then, Wiggs comes back from his long absence at the start of the playoffs, and all of a sudden JK is entirely out of the rotation. So that's going to be the interesting thing for me, whether he can, be in a closing lineup potentially every now and again.
I think that'll happen at some point. Like the regular season, you'll see everything at some point.
Yeah.
If he can space the floor, he's much more playable alongside Draymond in those closing lineups. So that's a good sign that he's shooting well. And his defense needs to continue the progression we saw at the end of last year. He has to prove that he can guard like the opposing 4 or 3,
Mm.
If not, he won't see many closing lineups, I don't think. We'll see.
No. Yeah, look, his defense is. I still think he's a better individual defender. He's almost an alternative to GP2 in terms of you actually kind of want him on the primary ball handler. Like I've seen you see him guard Doncic and Tatum kind of at times, and he actually LeBron, like he can like physically, he's obviously incredibly athletic. He's got the size. It's more the off-ball stuff, which I think Steve Kerr, has his issues with, and the Warriors have their issues with. And even on Saturday against, the Lakers in that opening preseason game, there were times where he kind of just roams around off the ball and, isn't fully engaged kind of thing, and can make mistakes in terms of, defensive rotations and stuff like that. So that'll probably be the biggest thing, rather than just his kind of one-on-one individual defending, because I think, as young as he is, he's literally only turned 21 years old. He's already shown that he's pretty capable as a one-on-one defender. It's more the off-ball stuff. Can he become when he's roaming off the ball, can he become a help defender like Giannis? We know Giannis is so good in those. Sorry, I've got a very dry voice at this time of the morning. Can he become like Giannis, where, Giannis, the Milwaukee don't want him guarding, the primary ball handler or whatnot, because they want him as a roamer who can be a great help defender. Anyway, let's kind of spread out a little bit from the Warriors to, the rest of the NBA. Western Conference this season is incredibly competitive. It's probably, I've said there's 10, 11 teams that could legitimately be top 4, 5 seeds in the West. What does your kind of top 6 in the West look like, and where do the Warriors sit in that mix?
Let's see. I think until proven otherwise, the Nuggets are the team to beat. I think the Suns will obviously have a very good regular season record. The question is how that lineup will hold up in the playoffs. Is Beal and Nurkic exploitable on defense? Probably. I think the Lakers will have a good regular season. The Kings, the Grizzlies, and the Warriors are my top 6 in no particular order. I think the Warriors would be happy to get 3 or 4 seed. Like, there's so many good teams there. That 6 has the Mavericks and the Clippers on the outside. I think those are 2 big question marks. Like, can Kawhi and PG stay healthy? Can Doncic and Kyrie play together at all? We'll see.
Yeah, I've been pretty big on the Mavericks this off season. I think I don't know why I'm believing in Kyrie Irving, because he's shown for years that I probably should say otherwise. But I do think that him and Luka can work. I think Luka needs to be better defensively. I think he can be. Whether that happens or not, we'll wait and see. He does look a lot fitter, having played through the off-season for Slovenia. So I think he can push an MVP case. I like the Grant Williams pickup. My biggest issue, I suppose, is, yes, Kyrie and Luka, haven't played too much in the preseason, but I think they've played 3 games to date, and they've lost 2 to Minnesota, and now they lost to Real Madrid yesterday. That's
really.
I mean, it's people were joking on Twitter that they lost to a soccer team, because Real Madrid are obviously known for their soccer.
I'm not sold, man. Like, you've got 2 players who are offensive first. Neither of them, they're both negative defenders. Neither of them is particularly impactful without the ball.
Mm.
It's like I have to see it.
Yeah,
See it and I believe it.
the closer it comes to the start of the regular season, the less I'm liking the Mavericks for some reason. And I started off really hot on them, and now I'm just kind of cooling off. I think a couple of months ago, I kind of did an episode with another guest, and we went through our Western Conference power rankings, and I think I might have had them fifth, which is quite a jump given they finished 11th last season. Like, that was kind of my big riser in the Western Conference, and I had teams. We haven't even mentioned the Kings yet. So, like, I think you didn't have the Kings in your six, did you? So you
No,
have the
they,
Mavericks.
they they were on the list, yeah, of my six.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. But like, I don't even have the Kings in my six at the moment. I kind of like the look of the Clippers at the moment, but again, I'm getting sucked into the fact that PG and Kawhi are actually fit and healthy at the moment, and we know that's probably not going to last. Again, it's wait and see. I don't. Sometimes I just get sucked in by the talent of teams, and maybe it's something that I need to probably address within myself. But I think at the start of every season, you try and feel optimistic about injuries and general player availability and stuff like that. So obviously, you've got Denver at the top of the West. I'm kind of thinking to myself at the moment that, Denver and then Milwaukee and Boston in the East are kind of in a tier of their own at the moment until another team, kind of rises and suggests otherwise.
Yeah, I mean Milwaukee on paper it's good. They lost their best backcourt defensive player. They got a great offensive player in Dame. We haven't yet seen how Dame can really run in offense with a player as dominant as Giannis. So on paper, it sounds good. Again, I want to see how that actually plays out. Denver is like they have very few weaknesses. I think, yeah, like I said, they're the team to beat. Um, what was the third team you said? Sorry,
What the
Denver
Celtics after the holiday
Celtics. Right.
trade,
Okay.
and yeah,
Man, I don't care who the Celtics add. Like, yeah, they have Porzingis, Holiday now. It's up to Tatum and Brown. Like, those guys need to play like they're the best players on the floor, which they haven't been doing in at least consistently in the playoffs. They're
yeah,
both still young. Like maybe they're getting to that point now, but like that team will go as far as Tatum and Brown will carry them. I don't care if you have Holiday and Porzingis or whatever. Like Porzingis will get played off the floor in the playoffs anyway, right?
yeah. He actually looked good in their preseason game in his again limited minutes, and again it's preseason, but he actually looked pretty fit and healthy. He did have some off-season injury troubles, but I think Boston are going to be really good. I do have them. That's kind of my top tier at the moment, but I agree with you on the whole Tatum Brown thing. Tatum to me still has his moments where he just doesn't get, lack of a better term, he doesn't get shit done. Now I know he had 50 plus points in a game 7 in the playoffs last season, but he has moments for me where he's incredibly inefficient. His lack of playmaking at times can stand out. And so I do think again, come playoff time, like let's say, the Warriors were to meet the Celtics again in the finals. Like we saw 2 years ago, the Warriors won that series because they had the best player on the floor and it wasn't particularly close in Steph Curry. And I'm still not sure, like, if that was to happen again this season, which is unlikely, let's be honest, but if it were, I'm still not sure, like, I'm trusting Jason Tatum over Steph Curry, or if that's even particularly close when it comes to the NBA Finals. But we'll see what kind of jump Tatum can make. But I just need a little bit more trust in him, to be honest. But I think they're just supremely talented. I think they've got the best starting five in basketball at the moment. And
Are they
Milwaukee.
starting Horford and Porzingis?
No, they'll be going with Holiday, Derek White, Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis with Horford as their sixth man, I'd imagine.
Okay, okay.
And I
I haven't
like Derek.
seen him play yet this year, but
Yeah, I
that
mean,
was yeah. I was gonna say.
I like Derek
Sorry, go ahead.
White. I think, I think he's a real. If he's your worst starter, I think that's really, really solid. Milwaukee are actually a little bit of a concern for me, given it looks like they're going to start Malik Beasley. and I saw reports that they want Malik Beasley to be their perimeter defender. Yeah, I just don't think that'll be working overly well. Chris Middleton, I think there's still issues with, like, is he actually going to get back to his best? He's had the knee issues. I think Dame and Giannis will be almost unstoppable offensively, and that'll mean that they win maybe 60 regular season games. But again, there might be some question marks in the playoffs.
I'm not sold on the Dame thing. Like, I have to see that Dame he got his team to the Western Conference Finals. Was it once or
Once,
twice?
yeah, and then got swept by the Warriors. Yeah,
He just hasn't shown recently that he can carry a team as the best player to be successful. Like, okay, you can blame all of the players he had on the team, no help, whatever. But still, I think we got to see more from him, and this is the first time we'll see him on with elite expectations on an elite team, and we'll
yeah.
see if he really is one of those elite point guards or if he was just the best, a really good point guard on a not great team for a long time.
Well, I mean, and we're going to see it, right? Like the worst kind of argument that I've ever heard, and the argument that is one of like my biggest pet peeves in the NBA is people that say, "Oh, if you just put Damian Lillard on the Warriors instead of Steph Curry, then they would have also won 4 championships." Like that is the worst argument.
Would
Like
have
in
won 0
basketball.
championships.
Like, I absolutely hate that with a passion. And obviously, we're not going to see that, but we're going to see, as you say, Damian Lillard on a team that will have championship expectations. And I think anything less, at least anything less than a finals appearance at a minimum, will be considered a disappointment. And we know, like, kind of what's happened in the offseason with the speculation around Giannis' future. If they can't get it done, if they can't at least get back to the finals, then I'm sure a lot of teams will be sniffing around to see what Giannis's availability might be, even as soon as next offseason. Anyway, is there anything else that you would like to add before we finish up?
Anything else to add? I'm excited for the season. I'll be watching the games. Nothing much.
Do you get to many?
The last 2 years I was out of the country.
But before that.
I have been to 1 or 2 games at Chase Center since it opened. I usually go to maybe 2 or 3 a year.
Yeah.
But damn, the games are expensive now at Chase Center. Back in the day, me and my friends used to buy the $8 tickets up at the top of Oracle Arena.
Yeah.
And in Microsoft Paint, we would edit the tickets to be down in the front row, and they would only scan them once you get through the door. Then once you get in there, they just check your ticket to get into the sections. So we would make fake tickets and get down on the floor side, and you could do it because no one gave a shit about the Warriors. It was empty. So yeah, those days are long gone. Now I go to a couple games a year. It's an investment now.
That's an incredible story. I mean, I've been to one game. I went to Game 5 of the Western Conference first round against the Nuggets in 2022, which was great because I can say that I was there at a playoff game in their championship run. But I remember going up to get a hot dog and a beer, and it was a slightly loaded hot dog, I will say, but it was still the equivalent. I think it was like $30, which was the equivalent of like 45 Australian dollars. And
That's all American sport.
Yeah. Well, I mean, food and beers and whatnot at Australian sporting events are expensive as well. Don't get me wrong, but that was next level. I came back home here and I was like telling people how much do you think a beer and a loaded hot dog cost me at Chase Center? And most of the answers would have been like maybe. If you said $30 Australian, that would be a stretch. Like that would be a lot, but maybe it's a sporting event. Maybe it's somewhat realistic. But to say $30 American and then have that translated to $45 Australian, absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, love the story. Where can we find your work this season?
Yeah, I'll still be writing for Blue Men Hoop every now and then. As far as basketball related stuff, you can visit my website. It's evanquarnstrom.com. Find me on Twitter. You can find the link there. It's a hard name to spell. And I do more like surf writing, travel writing. You can find it all there.
Fantastic. Alrighty, thanks for joining me, and I'm sure we'll hopefully catch up for another episode sometime during the season.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for the invite.